Kill yourself. Oh, and I should good. And you are muted.
I'm muted and killed myself. See?
Why is the sound coming on?
It's muted here.
I didn't realize it was back here.
I'll just be safe by doing that, in case it's me. All right, let's get started. Where's that coming out of? Is that coming out of mine?
I think it's coming out of that because it's an HDMI projector.
It's the first time that's ever happened.
This picks up everything for the HDMI.
Well, I guess the HDMI is working. Sorry about that. So welcome to our second TWed of the spring 2018 term. We're very excited. Anirudh is going to be presenting today. He's going to be presenting from a different side of the lab that we've been hearing from for about a term. A lot of our talks have been focused on kind of the enviro health semantics side of things. But now we're switching and we're getting more towards the earth science side of things that Andrew is going to talk about. It's work that he's been deeply involved in, and just a couple of logistics. We are streaming live. This is being recorded for posterity. Just keep that in mind as you ask your questions. Feel free to ask questions at any point. He's prepared to dive down deep. We're cognizant of not everybody here has been working on the Deep Carbon Observatory or Earth Science side of things. So if there's an acronym that needs to be expanded, please ask. And without further ado, let it rip. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John. Thanks everyone for being here. So let me just jump right in. The title is Visualizing and Analyzing Complex Environments in the Geo and Biospheres. It's the same title I had for my AGU talk, so sort of recycled that, but it's in a little bit more detail. That was supposed to be a 12-minute talk, and this is 45 minutes. So let's get started. So obviously, we start off with what is a complex environment. There's a few things on the checklist. A complex environment has a lot of components in it, and very diverse components, and generally, they can't be described by a single rule. They can't be reduced to a single level of abstraction. And sometimes the parts of these environments react in such a way that it's unexpected. You can't predict it from like the properties of these individual parts. So examples are climate, an ecosystem, a living cell, anything that's very complex. But the difficult question that we need to answer is how do we discover patterns and properties of these environments that we didn't know was there or we suspected was there in theory. So obviously, this is a very generic thing to say, but I'm going to say it anyways. A combination of data-driven methods and visualization techniques will help you discover these patterns. There's everyone in our lab who does that, so it's nothing surprising. But that's the approach to take, So to start with our use case, over the last 4.5, what's showing up here? Okay, whatever. So over the last 4.5 billion years, the Earth has evolved to get to how we know it today here. And throughout this time, life has evolved on Earth, The hypothesis of, one of the major hypotheses of the project is that minerals have evolved on Earth along with life evolving. So that's something that we need to quantify, prove, and then analyze. So our research goal for the DTDI project is to understand the coevolution of the geo and biospheres through data-driven techniques.
Could you expand DTDI?
DTDI stands for Deep Time Data Infrastructure. So we deal with a lot of deep time data, which means data going back through a lot of time. So one way we found we can do this is using network analysis. A lot of our talk is going to be focusing on this and how we use other visualizations and techniques to complement this. just before I start off, how many of you are familiar with network science, network analysis, or anything? Okay, I see some. Okay, good. Okay, so I'll just go through some basics. Bear with me. So the network science, as you know, is a field which studies complex networks. Networks, I'll just give you a definition later. But mostly network analysis techniques are really popular, and they've been applied in certain fields like statistical physics, computer science, biology, climatology, sociology, and so on. They've slowly been starting to adapt it in earth science, but they've still not been fully leveraged in that field. So we've been using that. And this is sort of when someone asks me why use this, this is the line that I always give them, is that you can view any ecosystem, in this case, geological and biological information systems, in a purely mathematical sense. And then you can infer new information from these networks, or you can infer information that you already knew, but you can quantify and validate that information. So that's something that really helps by using these techniques. So again, the basics of a network is like a network is any graph. Everyone here knows what a graph is. But so you have a set of vertices or nodes and a set of edges connecting said vertices or nodes. You can have many kinds of networks. The one you see here, or I guess I should just use the pointer for the people online. But the one you see here is a regular network with all the nodes being of the same type. You have bipartite networks like these, where you have two different node types, and then you can expand into like tripartite, tetrapartite, but you have multiple node types, and sometimes multiple node types means multiple kinds of edges as well, because each node is connected, and that means a different relationship. So moving on, this is kind of, so what is encoded in a network versus what is seen in the network visualization aspect. We try to, by a rule of thumb, we try to encode minimal information into the network and see what we can infer from it. So what's encoded? What do the nodes represent? What do the edges represent? What the layout should be? Most of the networks you're going to see here are going to use the force-directed network layout, which is based off the Fretchman-Reingold algorithm. And you can also encode additional parameters for the nodes, like it has this weight, it has this property, and so on. That would change like certain stats and properties of the network. But beyond this, what can be seen, inferred, or calculated? There are generally, the first thing you notice is the layout, the structure. So in a force-directed network, the principle is that you encode basic information in the network and let it settle into a stable state. So the network initially starts off very chaotic, and then it settles in to what it thinks is a stable state for that system. So you see patterns in that network geometry in that stable state. The second one is subcommunities formed in the network. So an entire network can represent an ecosystem, but there are ways that it forms subgraphs amongst itself, and those subgraphs mean something, and we can infer based on how they are grouped what they mean using some algorithms. I'll give you an example of important hubs in networks. Sometimes networks, there are pinch points in networks and hubs that connect to very important subgraphs. Those can be identified using betweenness, or just you can also see them visually. And these things mean different. You can infer different things from these networks depending on your use case and the question that you're asking. I'll give you examples of those. And you can additionally calculate local and global metrics. I'll give you examples of those later as well. Sometimes it's good to compare different network ecosystems, or how a single network ecosystem changes over time or through pressure. That helps you understand how a certain ecosystem evolves and how it changes based on what factors. So just starting off with, this is what the data looks like. This is what the raw data looks like. So what you see is mineral occurrence data in mindat.org. That's the data set we use. So for networks, you use a coexistence matrix or an edge list. So you convert it into a coexistence matrix like this, where you have a node and where they coincide. So chalcopyrite occurs 6,900 times with malachite. So that's an example of a co-occurrence matrix. These are usually symmetric. This is the edge list format.
So,
yeah.
I'm sorry. Go back one.
Yeah.
When you're referring to occurrence,
yes.
This is in. Explain.
Yeah, I will explain. So I was going to explain later, but I'll go through it right now. So there are multiple kinds of networks. The example that this one is of is a co-occurrence matrix for location. What this means is certain minerals were found at the same location. So it means that chalcopyrite was found with malachite or bornite those many times in the same location.
Okay.
That means that they geographically and geologically occur at the same location. But there are other ways to do it, like which I'll show you later. But so this is a edge list, which has just a 3-column format: source, target, and value. So it means that agricolite occurs with, or I should have picked an easier line. Never mind. But those two occur with each other X% of the times. Now, sometimes you have like individual occurrences where the weights are frequency. Sometimes you normalize it over a value because the frequency is just too large. But it means that node A is connected to node B. That's the format of this. And you have additional information for the nodes encoded like this.
Can that be interpreted as a probability? Or
yeah, it can. It depends on how you normalize it. Some people just do log, some people do probability.
Okay.
And then you have the additional parameters like redox state, color, luster, hardness. You can encode this into the nodes, the optional metrics that you can encode.
So that's metadata about them.
Yes. So I just added this slide to talk about the kind of packages that we use to visualize these things, and also for the analysis part. We mostly use R. iGraph package is the most useful and the most common. But iGraph has a certain disadvantage to it because it can analyze a lot of these metrics and give you the calculations, but visually, beyond a certain number of nodes, it doesn't work. It's just like a hairball or something. So you use other packages like GG network and D3 network. GG network is GG maps version just for network analysis, and the D3 network is the D3JS wrapper written in R. SNA networks are for additional analysis, and they work very similar to iGraph. For some of the more interactive stuff, we usually use D3JS. For the 3D network example that I'm going to show you later, it's 3JS and a combination of ngraph. So network metrics. This is also still fairly basic, but you have global and local metrics. I've written this stuff down, how important a single node is. But so just what you need to understand in principle is if you need information about every single node or every single edge, you use local metrics because it tells you how important one node is compared to another. Global metrics are things that tell you about an entire network, how dense an entire network is, what's the radius or diameter of the entire network. And you use that for comparison of like different network environments. So examples are degree. So degree is the number of links in degree and out degree, number of connections you have. Distance is the shortest distance between any two nodes. And betweenness is a metric that is used to calculate how a single node connects two important subgraphs. If a node has a high betweenness, it connects two very important and dense graphs. Global metrics are density. So how dense the entire network is. It's like this. So lower the number of connections, low density, and then it progresses to a fully connected network having density 1. Diameter is the largest distance, like to go from the two furthest nodes. And you have mean distance. So centralization has degree centralization and between the centralization, how many highly interconnected nodes are there and how many broker nodes, as in hubs, are available in the network. So these kind of comparison metrics are used in use cases like this, where you compare like the entire network environment. So what you see here is a network of Earth minerals, Mars minerals, Moon minerals, and Vesta. So you get a comparison in a descriptive and a quantitative sense of how dense that environment is compared to Mars, Earth environment is compared to Mars. And the same with the diameter, degree centrality, and so on. This is just a simple example of, these kind of descriptive statistics are important because one, they tell you about, revalidate some things that you thought you knew in theory. And second is they help you make decisions for what environment to analyze and what to compare it to and so on. Because in data science, we know that every decision you're going to make, it has to be based on the data. So going to community detection. Community detection, in short, is clustering applied to networks. So it's a way for us to group these networks in a way simply based on the number of connections and the way these nodes are connected. So there are algorithms that help us do this. I'll give you examples of two algorithms. One is called walk trap algorithm. The principle behind this algorithm is that you choose every node, conduct random walks through the network, and the hypothesis is that algorithms, the group nodes in the same group should have more walks. They should be very well connected and they should have more walks among each other. So you start with this node and you do your first random walk and you see, oh, that's the random walk. And you do more random walks like that and you see that these nodes always connect together in most random walks. So those nodes belong in the same group. Similarly, these are the four groups that are formed based on the walk trap algorithm. Low-N algorithm is a different way of grouping this. This is a pretty interesting one where it's based off of a modularity metric. Modularity means how, well, for a lack of a better word, how modular a node is. Meaning that when you take a single node and you disconnect it from the rest of the network, how is that network affected? So you do that for every single node and calculate how separate a particular node is from the rest of the network. So you assign modularity scores for each of these, then you start taking pairs of them. And then you start doing analysis on those groups. And so on. When you do this iteratively, you're given modularity scores for groups of nodes and individual nodes. And nodes with similar modularity scores belong together. So that's the principle of the Low-N community detection algorithm. So yeah.
Go back. So are these algorithms built into iGraph? Or do you
They are.
They are.
Yeah, these are. There are some more advanced ones that people publish papers about. Those you have to code yourself, but most of these are built into iGraph.
These are pretty standard.
They're pretty standard. So I'll start with probably the simplest example and then go on to like better stuff. So this is an example where we used a community detection algorithm. This is a cobalt co-occurrence network, a chromium co-occurrence network. So occur in the same locality. And what this showed us was the way these were grouped. It corresponds to a paragenetic mode of the minerals, which is the formational conditions, when and where these minerals were created and formed. So it sort of revalidated a particular classification technique that was created by the geologists. So that was one thing we learned. And
so parse that word, paragenetic.
Paragenetic.
Yeah.
So what it means is, I don't know the context of the name of the word, but what it means was how, when, and where those minerals were formed. And this is sort of a hierarchical classification method created by Bob Hazen, where he says if it's igneous and it has this geochemistry and if it has this property and this property, then it belongs within this paragenetic mode. If it's metamorphic or if it's sedimentary, and then you have a hierarchical structure below that. So it's a classification technique that they came up based on geological properties. And while none of those geological properties were encoded in this, just because of the way they occur together, we were able to group and apply community detection and say that, hey, that was actually a right way to divide them because that's what the data is telling us. So it's inferring without putting in any of that information into this network.
This was the first time that was...
This was the first time that we did that. This is like a very old thing. And that's the paper that got published sometime last year. Not only on this, but a combination of these findings. Now, slightly more dense, I guess. So you have a fossil co-occurrence network here. What you see are trilobite fossils. Every node is a fossil sample. And I have not names. It's too dense. Names don't really matter. What's important is this key here. Each of these are families, a way of grouping those fossils. And so what this tells you is this shows you an important trend in the network geometry. So we use the force-directed algorithm. This is what the final result looked like. So you see a time axis being formed right there. You go from older taxa to younger taxa, and you can verify that in the histogram at the bottom right. So what this is telling you is, again, no time information was embedded, but you see a time axis forming from bottom left to top right. This is kind of expected in fossils because fossils at the same time always occur together. So the time axis is expected. But the important thing to see here is this point. That's what I called a hub or a pinch point, where like there's a lot of things are converging and you see that. So what that shows in paleobiology is an extinction event. So what it means is a lot of these trilobites occurred together, but a lot of them went extinct and only a few of them survived and went on. This is seen here to a certain extent because it's only a trilobite sample, but when you step back and view all of the animal family network, then you see three distinct extinction events happening between the Cambrian fauna, the Paleozoic fauna, and the modern fauna. So these you can visually identify extinction events, and then you can dig into those extinction events to understand more about them. Sometimes you find extinction events that you didn't think happened, and then you're able to identify one and then analyze more. So this and a combination of like the network metrics that we applied, we were able to write up a PNAS paper. It's in revision right now, where we identified and quantified and ranked the 5 major extinction events using network analysis, and then we were able to make our hypothesis on why one extinction event was worse than something else. And on the flip side, bringing it to the current age, we were also able to prove that because we were ranking them, the current time is we're having the major or the highest extinction event and the fastest extinction event, which is much faster than any of the ones we knew in the past. So, what? Right now, yeah.
This was recently in the news.
This was also recently in the news.
Yeah.
They said it was 10,000 times faster than any of the other extinction events going on. That's true.
This is pretty amazing application of it.
So the thing is, extinctions happen over like multiple thousands of years. So it already started, and we're losing like diversity in some species rapidly. Even in plant species, by the way. Banana is under threat. So this is a pretty cool application as well. What you see here is an application in geochemistry and in protein structure. So there's a protein evolution network where you see every node is a different protein, and proteins are used by certain microbes for metabolic reactions. And each protein, they are used because they have different metals in them. So what you see, before I throw this in, is a general trend from iron on the left. The blue in the middle is manganese, and the one on the right, the orange on the right, is copper. So the trend shows that you're going from iron to manganese to copper. We are hypothesizing that the time axis, but it's really difficult to age these proteins. Each of these nodes doesn't have an age. So what we do is we then link this network and each of the nodes to the geochemistry data that we have, the mineral data that we have, and each of those minerals can be aged. So if we are able to link them well enough, we're able to put ages on this, and time axis actually exists.
Using a mineral.
Using the mineral, yes, as a proxy. And we have to do that well enough, and then we'll be able to do this, because no one has been able to age these proteins. And this is also a significant find because no one ever thought there would be a time axis or any kind of axis embedded in the behavior of proteins, over time. So yeah,
That's
and so along with the networks, an example of some of the analysis we applied to them was, you just seen the same co-occurrence network again and again. But so remember I showed you the trilobite network earlier. So this takes the trilobite, takes a superset of that, which is the lower and middle Cambrian genera, and a subset of that, which is a Redlichida, a specific kind of trilobite. So we wanted to understand these ecosystems as a whole. So we applied the assortativity metric, which tells you how diverse like an environment is or not. So we had 3 kinds of networks for each of these data sets. One is where they occur in the same location. Second is you connect them if they have the same age. Third is you connect them if they have the same taxonomy or taphonomy, which means they have the same preservation methods for the fossils. So what it tells us is obviously this is our baseline when you have age. When everything has the same age, all trilobites have the same age range, so they're going to be highly homogeneous. There's no diversity in the network. But in preservation metrics, you have a certain amount of diversity. On the other hand, all trilobites occur so diversely that the assortativity is fairly low for location. In the same way, when you look at Redlichida, it's more homogeneous in location because most of them were found in the same area versus age or taxonomy and taphonomy. So these kind of metrics help you understand the entire system and how homogeneous or heterogeneous they are, so that when you make claims about a certain, let's say you make claims about a Radlicida and location, you can say up to a certain probability that, okay, because the network is 60% homogeneous, it's going to extend to 60% of the nodes. Let's look at where the 40% is and why it's diverse, and let's focus in on that and look at what we want to learn about that. So all of these help in making better decisions, more informed decisions.
Can you go back a slide?
Yeah.
So you say values between 1 and -1.
Mm-hmm.
So where does that play into the graph?
So in this case, we didn't really have any negative homophily. Like there were, so not only was it in this case we had 0 values as the minimum because the nodes are at least certain amount of heterogeneous. Like -1 is like so at least a certain amount of homogeneous. I'm sorry, because when you have super heterogeneous networks, then you have like values going to negative. But it's all fossils, right? So you're not going to have that much of heterogeneity. That because we didn't have any negative value, I thought a radar chart would be good to show. So I put the title as 3D network. I'll explain the 3D part. But what you see here is a carbon network, a carbon bipartite network, where all the colored nodes are carbon minerals, and the gray nodes, hopefully you can see them, are the localities. So bipartite network, 2 kinds of nodes. So this shows us, one, it shows us an important geometry. It's a very symmetric network where you can see that all of the highly connected nodes are in the middle. Then you're surrounded very symmetrically by the localities, and then you have the rarer minerals on the outside. So what this tells us is that the carbon mineral ecosystem follows an LNRE distribution, which is a large number of rare. So what it means is the rarer minerals occur together, and in a large number of large number of rarer minerals occur together. The more common minerals occur not with a lot of diversity in them. So what this means is, if you're looking for common minerals, go look at the other common minerals because they're all going to occur together. If you're looking for rare minerals, go to where all other rare minerals are found. So using this information, and then I'll plug in the 3D network here, where this geometry is helpful to a certain extent, but you want to see how each of those groups react and what the geometry is. So you need to add a third dimension to understand how each of those groups are seen. So you can see here how sometimes those groups form like an umbrella-like shape, if I may say so. But and sometimes you can also zoom into the center right there, where you can go in and see those specific nodes because they are hidden in that hairball there in the 2D network. So it helps people explore more interactively and find out the information that they need. But the result of these two, combination of these two, was that we were able to find where some of these rare minerals were located, with other rare minerals. So DCO started a carbon mineral challenge where they said, so this in combination with another paper that was written in the project by Greta Heistad, who's a professor in, predicted that we have, she used the LNRE distribution to predict how many more minerals should be found, carbon minerals and otherwise. So he said, oh, there's a lot more minerals for us to find 1,200 more carbon minerals or something. I don't know the specific number. And so they said, oh, we know both of these things. So let's start a carbon mineral challenge and urge people to go find new minerals so that we can learn more. And so that started. It's been a success. We already found our first mineral called tinancolite. It's based off of falcon poop, but it's a mineral. So yeah. So that was the 3D mineral network. So you have also this concept of evolving networks. This is a paper. This is written for a paper that just got published. You can find it online, and got selected for editor's highlight. So good. the principle of an evolving network is, I told you, we need to sometimes compare network ecosystems and see how they evolve through time or through like any other metric, change in pressure, change in temperature, and so on. So let me, it's a fairly slow one, but you see, you basically start with this like one mineral, and that's how like sparse the ecosystem is. And as time goes on, you see it's very small there, but you see how the network just pulls in new minerals and adds in new elements. And
So what's the scale of it?
it's going from 3,800 million years to 0 to now.
Oh, okay.
So as you go towards the end, you see more activity happening. And around this time, like around 2,300 years was the first great oxidation event. So suddenly you'll see a lot of minerals being formed.
So 2,300 million years.
2,300 million years ago, yes. There was a sudden rapid rise in oxygen. And because of the rise in oxygen, new mineral formation was, there was a lot of new mineral formation. So complexity increased. So based on patterns that the geologists and biologists found here, they wrote a paper on the chemical factors that this is a cobalt mineral ecosystem, by the way. So that impacted the usage of cobalt minerals in the Archean ion. But so you can see how nodes are continuously added because new minerals are formed, and you see how the network ecosystem adjusts itself to a stable state every single time.
So kind of a little perspective here. How much can you sort of articulate what if this was sort of known, but was minus an intuition?
Okay, so the first thing, yeah,
trying to understand what is a totally new discovery versus what is just helping
shape things we knew.
Shape the way to
so
think about
the
it.
one thing that was known was, yeah, you know, when the oxygen increased, a lot of activities increased. That was known, but exactly what activities increased, what minerals were formed, were not very well known. Also, we knew that you know, oxygen and hydrogen have increased. Minerals containing oxygen, hydrogen increased. But what we also figured out, I think, was sulfur also played a really important part, because you see the sulfur node here increasing in size as new connections are formed. So some of those things were new findings. Also, we found when we compared this, like I said, this has to be complemented with other data-driven techniques. So when we use this cobalt ecosystem, made a decision tree out of it using C trees, and we tried to find the most important factors that they were. Sulfur, availability of sulfur was like top, which was really surprising to them. And that was one of the things that we could put down as, now here's what we found. But for more specific details, I'd urge you to read the paper. But yeah, so this is like an example.
So what kind of, sorry to interrupt again, but what kind of reaction does this get when you're at AGU and you present that, you're showing this?
Yeah, this always gets a good reaction because they want us sometime. I know Bob told the story where he was presenting this and they told him to leave on this animation to run even after he had spoken, because he was like one of the last people to talk. So while people are asking questions, this was continuously looping because they want to see more and see more. So like, if I'm gonna, I think I'm gonna do something. This is again using iGraph for how this was implemented, and you see it's fairly sparse in its thing. So beyond a certain limit, this will not be useful. I didn't put it in here, but what I was going to show you, I'll show you after the talk.
Yeah, sure.
The like a more dense network going through this. Okay. So there are other visual representations that you use to complement the network analysis that help you make decisions. So this is one of the earliest things that Stefan had created. Hopefully a lot of you know him or remember him. So this is a skyline diagram. It's a fairly simple histogram, but when you put it together in this perspective, what it tells you is that axis is time. This is the different first row periodic transition metals, and so you see how each of these the frequency of occurrence of each of these minerals has changed through time. Now, what this told us was the simplest thing you see is there's a gradual rise towards modern age, but every one of these elements is very different and diverse from each other in the way they have occurred. So we tried combinations of this, and then we found out that when we start, you can't look at all the minerals on Earth as an ecosystem. You need to start at certain subsets. So we using these kind of visualizations, we figured out how we divide our initial subsets and start exploring elements. So we said, oh, by element seems to be diverse enough and significantly different enough that we can first analyze, cobalt environments, nickel environments, chromium, zinc, all of them, And so this kind of visualization helps you make those decisions.
That's a really nice visualization of a
Yeah.
tensor.
Yeah.
That is really sweet.
Yeah.
It's, what is it, like a 6D or 5D?
Yeah,
tensor?
and this is in Python, yeah.
So that's Python?
Yeah.
I suppose it's
Because
okay.
Stefan did Python.
It's okay.
So chord diagram is a different way to represent a network-like structure. It gives you slightly different, like you ask different questions and look at different patterns here. So data set looks exactly the same, but the thickness of the edges connecting from A to B show you the weights of the actual connections. And you obviously color them in a way that you understand. So these are colored by different mineral groups. So you're able to understand how a primary mineral group reacts with a secondary mineral group. And why, like how many times they react and so on.
This is Circos?
This is Circos, but that's a simple one. Sometimes you end up with this. What do you do here? So here you need an interactive aspect. So this is in D3 where you can hover on one and it shows you a faceted browser view of a chord diagram. That way you can understand how many connections for each of these nodes and how well connected they are compared to the others.
On the campfire if you could figure out what to put on the side.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you can put these on the side, like as arcs, and keep building on it. But yeah, Peter did mention this would go good on the campfire. But
I have a student working with me this term. If you want to throw me over
sure.
Is that on a GitHub or something?
Yeah.
Yeah. Throw that over to me and we could have her do it.
So that's the end of like the vignette, because this looks like an R vignette, all visualizations. But the whole point is it's really difficult to understand these complex environments and definitely visually represent them. And when you're working in a field like earth science, where direct analysis is important, but the way you represent your results becomes all the more important so that people can understand visually. Visualizing these complex environments is essential, and it gathers a lot of attention for the project.
Well, I think it's exciting because I think in one of going way back to the beginning of GCO, one of the things that they aspired to was to bring forward these kinds of visualizations, because they were quite literally in the heads of people like Bob Hayes and Jesse Ossoville, but they weren't.
Yeah,
people couldn't.
Also,
couldn't
the second, a second sort of venue to use these becomes really important in the education section.
Yeah.
Because how do you educate people who, like, how do you describe things to them which they don't know anything about, but you need to teach them? Like for students and education and all of these, this becomes really important.
How do you think you've done in terms of pushing the capability out to do this?
I think we've done well enough to a certain extent of reducing the intimidation of using these technologies to them. Because initially, the first reaction was, hey, this is so cool, but it must be really difficult to do it. It feels nice because you did it, but then you need to push the fact that it has to be widely implemented everywhere. So you start promoting people to actually use it, give them Jupyter notebooks that, here's the code and just plug in your data set and start using. So we've been doing that for over a year and a half or something. And people are starting to code this stuff themselves now and to use this technology.
That's great.
Our contribution now comes in with like the analysis perspective, the math aspect of it, and just a general thinking of, because we think from a completely different standpoint than them, just from the data standpoint. And that expertise comes in handy. But people aren't intimidated, at least in our group anymore. And we have a fairly large group, which I was going to show you. But yeah, that's our DTDI website, the project website.
That's really sweet.
So you can see like some of the networks we've created. This will constantly be updated. You have the scientists. So these are the PIs. So we have 6 PIs. Bob Downs from Arizona, Paul Fakowski from Rutgers, Peter Fox, of course. Bob Hazen is the PI for the entire project, and the Andrew Knoll from Harvard, and Dimitri, who's Fang is Peter's new postdoc. Dimitri is his advisor from Johns Hopkins.
Mhm.
And we have all of these affiliates, postdocs, and you see Marshall there, and all of these students. So it's a fairly large group and fairly productive group, right? But so that's like the project background. I also opened up R in case 640 or 45. So if you have any questions, please ask. If you have any questions about some of the code, I also have it here. So that's it.
That's fantastic. So what do we have here?
So this is the code for the evolution network, the evolving networks. So there's 2 of these here. This is the fossil evolving network, and the other one was the cobalt. The cobalt was the one you saw. So before I show you the code,
so in terms of your your architecture,
Mhm.
that's a big word, but is it one of doing a lot of your computations and scripts and
Mhm.
like sourcing them out of notebooks? Is that
Mhm.
pretty much how you do it?
Yeah, yeah.
So-
Also, I slowly started making the rest of our group familiar with GitHub and comfortable with it. So some of the more tech-savvy people are also just using GitHub and pulling from it. But Jupyter Notebook is a lot less intimidating because all the packages are pre-installed. Everything you need is already there in the environment.
Well, we've been finding that
Mhm.
using our studio server on the cluster
Mhm.
in kind of a shared environment is very powerful. So the combination of our studio server
Mhm.
on a multi-core machine, setting up shared directories for collaborative work,
Mhm.
but with the proper security, and then using kind of the R notebooks paradigm. For,
Right.
That is very effective for
Absolutely, yeah.
for group work.
Yeah. So first thing I'm going to show you.
Is the DGDI group in working in Jupyter Hub? They're using a version that's served here?
Yes, yes. It's the deep time server that we have at RPI. That's right.
Deep time server.
Yes. What
is the deep time server? How big a machine?
It's a fairly. It's not too big. It's like a 4 gig RAM and like 100 gig space or something. It's not very large. Yeah, it's super little.
What are we seeing?
I was going to show you like the more dense evolving network because that promised that.
Oh, right. Yes.
Because when it gets too large, the smoothness goes away and you can't use iGraph, so you have to sort of power through differently.
Is that gggraph or is that using?
I use gggraph, yes, for that, but I had to like hack it in a certain way. It gives us 2 perspectives. So what you see here are 2 graphs, one with like evolution based on origination and extinction, and the other is just based on
cool.
origination. So it's a fairly short one, 57 seconds, but so you see how it moves like in a snake-like pattern almost, because you have extinctions happening, and at every point in time, there's only those many fossils, those many animals are living.
So, one of the things that strikes me is this is stuff that's like analogous to Barabasi's stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah, it is. It is based off of Barabasi's model. It is based off of it.
So, do you see concepts such as preferential attachment stuff kind of exhibiting themselves, or
I see it to a certain extent, but what I want to apply next more so is like a controllability aspect in this, because we see this change. Is there any way we can influence and control this change to understand how it would affect these environments differently? Because that would really be an interesting use case for us, because we want to change the way like future is going to be, right? Hopefully, but so that the controllability and aspect comes really is really close to my heart. That's what I want to explore. But I haven't thought about that as much. So this is just the origination. So as and when it originated, and this is the entire ecosystem as it evolved.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a much richer picture.
It's a much richer picture, but this is not possible from the technical side, from the coding side. This is not possible in iGraph. You have to hack it this way in gggraph.
Yeah.
ggNetwork, sorry, but yeah. So stuff like this.
So the problem with doing that is because you have that kind of nice integrated management of the graph plus the visualization. That's also the burden with it. So with using gggraph,
using ggNetwork, what you do is you use the network package and SNA package as your backbone for the analysis, and then this will be just like an interface for the visualization. So this handles it like a canvas in JavaScript, where you initially create multiple layouts, overlay them, calculate the X and Y coordinate, keep those X and Y coordinates static, and then plot over them as they evolve or as they occur or they disappear. So you have to hack it together that way. Because there's currently no easy way to do it unless we build a package for it or something. So yeah, this is the one with the fossils. So you have the network package as a backbone. You have to format the data, which is kind of the biggest pain with this in a certain way.
So that was another question I was going to ask you. I was kind of in terms of style. Are you using tidyverse to sort of flow this?
Not for this. This was done for a hack. But I usually when I revamp this for comments and the code has to be submitted along with the paper. So during that time I do, but not what you see here. Definitely not. But yeah, so there are packages where you can render the3 movies like this. But it's just easier to hack it because there's a package for evolving networks, but again there's a scalability issue there beyond a certain number of nodes. Especially with the fossil networks, we use the PBDB, PaleoBioDB. That's like even the smaller groups are like 20,000 nodes and so on.
So that brings to mind questions of strategy in terms of memory management and parallelization and stuff. Are you using tricks and what sorts of tricks?
So I've been tricks-wise, not so many tricks, but I've first of all been using the idea server a lot because otherwise smaller systems crash. And there's a lot of pre-compilation I do where you and pre-compile each function and then have him run it so that you store you're not over memory.
Right.
But beyond that, I've been looking at some of the parallelization packages. They don't seem to be directly usable yet with these kind of data formats. So I'm still trying to figure out some issues, but I can't figure out a way to use the packages and parallelize it. You have to code the stuff in the packages from scratch and parallelize it using the parallel packages.
Well, there's a couple. I mean, one side is to do it from whole cloth and C++ and stuff
like
that.
Right.
But in others, if there's ways to vectorize it or we should talk about that because we might have some guys over there that could help. Well,
any other questions? I'm sorry, we've just been talking.
This turns into our users group.
Questions? Anything you want to see again? Anything you want me to show you?
So how is the co-author in a lot of those papers? Great job. In fact, his name is in front of yours sometimes.
No, that's a different how.
Oh, that's a different how. Okay.
That's the real side. Geo side.
You just said real.
No, I mean,
You did say
discrediting
real.
yourself.
That's the geo side.
Yeah, he's a postdoc now working in Lyon.
So any other questions? So this is very cool. Not only because we're getting to see this applied to sciences, but it's nice to get a nice review of network science, that aspect of it, to see it applied. I think that's some of the really cool stuff. What I didn't quite see is complex networks or complex.
Yes, so the complex part of it, the environment is still complex enough. It's just hardware that is lacking for actually analyzing and visualizing some of these complex networks. So all of PBDB or all of MINDAT is like 5,200. All of MINDAT is 5,200 millirels and about 1 million plus localities. That's a lot to process and crash.
I think that's one of the real hard computational problems is how do we apply complex evolving system theory to this kind of stuff.
So the environment is complex. The current presentation of the complex part of my talk would be not so much complexity in the network structure or number of nodes. It would be in the complex relationships between these nodes.
Complex dynamics.
Yes, and understanding the complexity in these relationships and then inferring information based on that.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, so most of these visualizations have been like force directed.
Most of them, yes.
And that is 3D. There's 3 dimensional.
Yeah.
So how far would it be to create like a 3D kind of world visualization? Like kind of like how in like a game engine. Because I feel like this kind of research makes sense to do that.
Yeah. So let me answer that in like twofold. So there's 2 kinds of 3D visualizations. One that you saw just now, and one that we're going to be working on next semester. The one that you saw is an immersive environment, which is what you require for a game-like setting, where you immerse yourself in a world.
That's the one we saw.
That's the one you saw, where like you're in a galaxy-like world where you're going in and out of it, right? Like you can zoom in and travel around, but you can't do much with it because it's like a set world. The second 3D visualize, and that's fairly easy to do. It's like people have built packages for that. You just need to adapt JavaScript stuff to set it up like that. The second and much more difficult thing to do is not a fully immersive environment, but an interactive environment where you need to take this 3D network in a 3D environment, virtual reality environment, snip it, play around with it, adjust it, pull it, modify it, which with these JavaScript libraries really can't be done. So you need to code everything from scratch. So we're working with people in University of California, San Diego, I should say, to do this. That's our next step for how we're going to progress on 3D. Because beyond immersive environments, we actually want to use this for collaboration, education, more than just showing off. So that's the next step. So your question was how easy would it be to do it for a gaming-like setting? Gaming-like setting, to me at least, involves mostly an immersive environment, like a SimCity-like thing where you're walking around in the street and doing stuff, right? So the immersive environment should be easier because you build your 3D models, you set the coordinates for each one of your buildings and things, whatever is there, and just one character is moving around in it. So it should be easier because there's JavaScript code for you to interact with this, because the moving around aspect of this is taken from like a gaming JavaScript library where it uses a joystick or a keyboard keys to move around.
Well, so I don't mean video game would be like you go in and then you can play with the maps and science. I mean, you'd actually see copper and different metals like kind of interacting and like forming complex minerals, and what would be rendered is the actual like different rock structures.
Well, yeah, that
so it kind of looks like an actual world.
That's a different thing, but that's definitely possible, and there are people doing something similar, just not us. We are more dealing with the data science aspect of it, but it's a representation problem that a lot of Latin America are doing. So some things that you can check out is that UC San Diego, it's called the Keck Caves project. So check that out. They're doing a lot of 3D modeling like this. So one example I have is, forget the network example of the interaction. They have a mineral structure, like a rock structure or any structure. And they're saying this is how the rock looks. When you dig into this cross section of this rock, you open it up and you see all of these things inside the cross section. And it's all immersive, it's all 3D, and you can go through that. It's similar to the thing that you were talking about. Yeah, that's there, and people are doing it.
So perhaps a little context. There's I can't remember the scientist's name. Is it Wendy? The one who does the ab initio stuff. It's so one of the some of the initial work in Deep Carbon Observatory. The cool thing about it is that it spans people working from first principles, the formation of minerals, all the way to volcanic activity and this sort of thing, and the kind of the common threads through all of that. But these scientists, the ab initio means from first principles.
Right.
What are the properties of these minerals from their first principles, and then predicting from first principles what the characteristics of these that they should exist, and then their partner, those who study things under high temperature and pressure, etc., in the Earth, confirm their existence.
Yeah.
So there's the theoretical sort of existence proof, and then the observational thing. And then they also get into the 3D modeling and that stuff. So these people are literally kind of doing what you're suggesting, but from the physics.
And they do it not just for like these rocks and stuff. I actually saw a really cool video from the same lab where they have Earth. They're doing a cross section of the Earth and looking at the deep interiors of the Earth and what's there and everything. It's an accurate 3D model, and you can interact with it, go in, go out, all of these things. Yes.
So I think we should thank you, Aaron.
Yeah.
And then